And the biggest challenge is that goods can move in very easily in Europe, but not the black person. All the resources that are coming from our own African countries can enter freely into the European Union, but not the black person. And it's not by coincidence, that is the way it has been planned. So understanding why these treaties were made and how they affect us and how we are perceived by these treaties is very important. So it is just something on paper.
So are you heard in Germany? What are the initiatives that you take to make your advocacy more effective and more heard?
I think I would say now we have found a space in Germany to do the advocacy work that we're doing, because it is a lot of advocacy work. And how we have become effective is by doing our own publications, our own documentation, because then with documentation and publication, if, for example, if you go to our website, there's a whole sort, it has become like an archive of everything in terms of racism, discrimination, gender-based violence. We have created our own archive, and by that way, we are able to reach as many people as possible, and people can use our website or our books as a referral point of the work that we are doing.
Yeah. Are there in the work of advocacy that you are doing in your association, your actions as a Black association, are there any remnant of power structure in it?
Power structure is there, because even money is a power structure. It's a dynamic. And to do advocacy work, you need to be committed to it. And for it to be effective, you have to be consistent. How can you be consistent if you don't get funding for the work that you're doing, And people don't take advocacy work seriously because they expect you to have a job, and then now this is an advocacy work is something that you do on the side. And if we didn't take advocacy work seriously, then we would not have been where we are. So there are challenges. The power structures, racism is a challenge. The language is a challenge, And of course, we have the challenge of living in a European country and coming from Africa, in terms of the terminologies that are used that sometimes put us in a victim position, and fighting the discourses to confront certain narratives and certain mentalities. So it is not just talking about the advocacy work, it's also shifting a whole concept of how people perceive people from Africa, especially the woman.
Do you think that your advocacy can allow people to perceive women or other people from Africa another way? Or is there something else that can be done to change the perception of people of African descent?
I think the advocacy work we have done is very effective in terms of changing this narrative, especially because, like I told you in the beginning, there was this concept that African women are gender conforming, that their work is to stay home and bear children, especially that aspect of African women being connected to only childbearing and staying at home, and that we are not political. That's something we really confronted. At least this has changed completely. That's why I can say that we are also being included in the commission for the Senate in terms of anti-Black racism. It means that's why we are being invited to the European Union, or the institutions that acknowledge the work that we have been doing. It means we are being invited in the table where we are demanding for change. I think that's the most effective.
Yeah. So I said earlier that in 2019, you initiated the Break Isolation Group, BIG, within the International Women's Space. So it's a self-organized working group of refugee women what does it mean practically to be self-organized, and why is it important to be self-organized?
It's very important to be self-organized, because when you live in a European country, you become invisible. You become invisible not only because of your color, you become invisible because of the language, you become invisible mostly because of racism. And the only way to be visible is to self-organize. And by this concept of self-organization is something that has, we have the perspective, even, for example, during colonialism, when our grandfathers were fighting for independence, they had to self-organize. We have very different organized groups that fought for independence. So we come from this background of self-organizing in terms so that we can change a course that is oppressing us. And if we do not understand this, we don't understand where our history, then we will not be able to understand where we are in terms of changing everything that has been affecting our life. And it's unfortunate that the Black person is the most oppressed person, despite the Black person coming from the richest continent. This is also a narrative that Africa is poor, but Africa is being impoverished so that they can, exploitation can continue. Yeah. So it's a whole discourse that we have to understand where our struggles begin.
So do you think globally it is something that Black organization might stand more often toward to change the perception that they have? Like I'm talking about self-organization, of course.
We are not changing a perspective. We are changing a discourse, a complete discourse. And by self-organizing is the only way, is one of the many ways that we can achieve that, because we come from very different perspectives and different backgrounds and different in countries, especially Africa, that sometimes we can meet as Africans, but we cannot speak our language. So you find we're only speaking the colonial language and not understanding that already a language is a barrier, that I cannot speak to my African, friend or colleague in our African language. And to understand the political implication that everything that is affecting us in our daily lives, because it is not a coincidence. It is very well designed that things are the way they are. So how do we change that? So that's the most important point of being self-organized.
There is an article, the Article 13 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Since 1948, it guarantees the freedom of movement. It means, I think, that people can normally settle freely within the countries. In your experience, this declaration or this article, is it just a beautiful word on a paper? Are they privileges granted to a part of the human population that some have not?
I think these treaties and agreements, they do not include us. We have to be very clear. We are forcing them to include us. Or if they include us, they have clauses that completely exclude us because we are not termed as human beings. So that's one thing we should be clear about. And why I say that is that when Europeans left Africa after colonization, they left a post-colonial Africa that was planned. It was in a way, it was planned to fail, post-colonial Africa, without even caring about the people who are going to be in that continent. So after colonization, after our resources and our countries being plunged and raped of the resources, there was post-colonial Africa, and some of these treaties came after these times, after the Second World War, and we were not part of this treaty. As you know, we were just included much later. But then the Europeans left a constitution in our countries that allowed them for free movement, coming in and coming back. But it did not include us in their constitution to come into their countries. Goods can move in very easily in Europe, but not the Black person. All the resources that are coming from our own African countries can enter freely into the European Union, but not the Black person. And it's not by coincidence, that is the way it has been planned. So understanding why these treaties were made and how they affect us and how we are perceived by these treaties is very important. So it is just something on paper.
Yeah. So all in all, don't you think that the best way to resist or to counter the migratory prejudices in Western countries is to empower or lift up the countries of origin in Africa, in the global South in general?
This is the most important, and that's what we are doing. Especially now, we are in the diaspora. I mean, the people being called the people in the diaspora. In everything that we should do it in the interest of our motherland, because we are the representative of Africa. We are the children of Africa. We are the people who are going to change the course of Africa, and we know Africa for a fact is the richest country in the world. It's the richest country with all the resources coming from Africa, but then it has been impoverished so that we can be the way we are. And if you think of that the food eaten in Europe, the clothes that are worn in Europe, someone is being exploited somewhere, be it in Africa or in Asia. And what we need to demand is fair trade, that this exploitation, neocolonialism doesn't keep continuing. We have been impoverished so that we can work for the Europeans, that we are growing crops in our country. Ghana is producing cocoa and it's sending to Europe. Clothes are being made in Africa, then given a European label, but someone is being exploited somewhere. It's also the same with Asia. So we have to understand the political implication and why we have to change from a political perspective. We do not want support. We don't want aid. We do not want these NGOs coming to our country, because they're also there to ensure this neocolonialism is still taking place. But we want to be perceived as equal partners and have a dialogue from an eye-to-eye level.
We are getting toward the end of this interview. To end this, we would like to have some thought experiment with you. Imagine that the projects on which you're working on go the best way they can, and 100 years from now, how do you see the world? How do you hope the world to be?
I am not hoping. We have to change the world to be that Africa is how it's supposed to be, not the way it's perceived to be. Yeah. We are not hoping, we are changing towards that. Because if you look at demographically, Africa has the biggest number of the young people. If you look at resource-wise, we are the richest country in the world. So why are we not having, an eye-to-eye kind of dialogue? And we have to stay in this power structure that keeps us in the level of poverty and misery. Why is the face of poverty an African face, while as all the resources are coming from Africa? This is what we are changing. So in 100 years, it will be different. Actually, there will be no Europe. I'm just joking.
Yeah, I understood.
Yeah.
So, JenniferKamau, thank you for your time. As they say in your country, asante sana.
Thank you.
Dear listeners and viewers, we have been very happy to discuss this subject with Jennifer and your company. Thank you very much. Do not hesitate to share this around you. I hope to meet you very soon in other discussions. Thank you, and
okay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.